When night falls and the world goes quiet, your mind begins to wander. Doubt whispers, the silence deepens, and somewhere in that stillness, truth waits to be uncovered. This isn't a story to help you sleep. It's a journey into the restless heart of one of history's greatest thinkers, Al-Ghazali. They called him the proof of Islam. His arguments commanded the attention of kings. Yet, he himself was tormented by questions so deep, they threatened to consume him. Was knowledge an illusion? Was life just a dream? Or was doubt the very torch that lights the path to God? Tonight, as you lie in the quiet dark, let his journey carry you, from wandering roads to divine illumination, from crippling doubt to unshakable faith, and finally, to a question that lingers just at the edge of sleep. What if the waking world is the illusion, and dreams are the true light? Close your eyes, stay with me, and let the philosophy of Al-Ghazali become not just history, but your own reflection in the quiet of the night. 1. The restless heart. The lamps in the scholar's chamber had long been extinguished, yet sleep refused to visit him. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the distant call of a night watchman and the faint rustle of parchment left scattered on his desk. In the city beyond, men spoke his name with reverence, calling him a pillar of wisdom, the crown of knowledge. But in this hour, alone with himself, the crown felt more like a chain. Fame had followed him like a shadow. Courts summoned him, kings sought his counsel, and students filled lecture halls to hang on his every word. Applause came easily, yet his heart remained unquiet. Each compliment struck him not as praise, but as accusation. They believed he held answers. He feared he held nothing at all. Lying on his mat, he stared into the darkness until it seemed to press in upon him. Questions, once polite guests in his mind, had become intruders. They did not whisper. They roared. What is truth? Can the senses be trusted? Is knowledge anything more than illusion, dressed as certainty? The more he tried to silence them, the louder they became. Like a chorus of unseen voices echoing through the night, he pressed his hands over his face, as though to block out the noise, but the sound came from within, the laughter of students, the clinking of coins given in gratitude, the letters of praise. All dissolved into a single, terrifying thought. What if it is all hollow? What if I am hollow? In that restless hour, the scholar felt a truth more cutting than any blade. The applause of the world could not quiet the unease of his soul. In the vast silence of the night, he realized that fame had given him everything but peace. And as the first trace of dawn crept across his window, he understood that the questions were not passing visitors. They were here to stay. He too, the seeds of suspicion, before the first pale threads of dawn could reach his chamber, Al-Ghazali stirred, yet sleep clung to him like a fleeting shadow he could never grasp. The room smelled faintly of ink and parchment, of candle smoke lingering from the night before. Every object, the carved wooden desk, the scattered manuscripts, the brass inkwell catching the morning light, seemed imbued with a subtle dissonance, as if reality itself had begun to tremble beneath him. He moved among his shelves, fingertips brushing spines that had once promised certainty, only to feel them pulse like veins of hidden doubt. Words he had memorized for years now slipped and danced before his eyes, refusing to settle. Each letter seemed to whisper secrets he could not understand. Each phrase, a riddle veiled in shadows. Logic, the weapon of his intellect, the shield that had carried him through years of debate, felt brittle, like thin glass ready to shatter under the weight of a single thought. Even the simplest sensations betrayed him. A drop of water trembling in a cup seemed heavier than it should be, cooler, stranger. The subtle creak of the wooden floor beneath his feet sounded alien, as if the house itself were watching, listening, judging. And the rhythm of his own heartbeat, once steady and reassuring, now felt like a drumbeat in a dream whose rules he could not decipher. He thought of the philosophers he had revered, those brilliant minds who had promised clarity and certainty, and suddenly, doubt struck him like a silent storm. What if their brilliance had been an elegant trap? What if their words were mirrors reflecting not truth, but illusions designed to ensnare seekers in the labyrinth of their own minds? Al-Ghazali sank into his chair, pen trembling in hand, and felt the first true chill of fear. Not fear of death, nor of failure, but fear of the world itself, now appearing fragile and unreal, a delicate stage where even reason could falter. He sensed, for the first time, that the very tool he had trusted, his reason, might betray him. And as he sat alone in the half-light, the city around him hushed and dreaming, the scholar realized a startling truth. Perhaps certainty itself was a dream, and he had been living it unaware. The night seemed to breathe with him, whispering that the journey into doubt was only beginning, and that its shadows would follow him further than he had ever imagined. 3. The fall of certainty. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale, uncertain glow through the latticed windows. Yet Al-Ghazali felt no warmth, no comfort. His chamber seemed to shrink with each passing hour, shadows crawling along the walls like slow-moving echoes of his own restless thoughts. The silence pressed against him, heavier than any weight he had ever known. And in that quiet, he heard the first tremors of a truth too sharp to ignore. Nothing, not even his own mind, could be trusted. He looked around at the familiar objects that had once been anchors, his ink-stained desk, the neatly stacked manuscripts, the brass candlesticks catching the weak light, and saw them differently now. Every surface seemed brittle, every line of writing trembling like water disturbed by an unseen hand. Memory, the faculty he had relied on to hold knowledge steady, betrayed him. Passages he had read countless times now appeared unfamiliar, even suspect. The very act of thinking became a perilous journey, each thought slipping like sand through fingers, grasping at certainty. Al-Ghazali's senses, once allies in his pursuit of wisdom, now seemed conspiratorial. The cool air brushing his face felt sharper, almost mocking. The distant clatter of the city, muffled as if heard through water, seemed unreal, as though he were observing life from behind a veil. Even the warmth of his own hands felt foreign, like instruments whose rhythm he could no longer follow. Every sense, every perception, was suddenly suspect. As he walked through the quiet corridors of his home, doubt spiraled within him like a dark wind. Could his eyes see truth? Or were they deceived by shadows of light? Could his mind grasp reality? Or was reason itself a clever illusion, dressing chaos as order? The scholar felt a vertigo unlike any other, a dizzying collapse of the foundation he had built his life upon. For the first time, he understood the terrifying fragility of certainty. It was not merely a loss of knowledge. It was the unraveling of existence itself. If nothing could be trusted, not senses, not memory, not logic, then what remained? And in that profound emptiness, Al-Ghazali felt a shiver of both fear and awe. The world had become a mirror of doubt, and he, for the first time, stood alone before it, stripped of the familiar comfort of truth. He sank to the floor, pressing his forehead against the cold wood, and let the shadows of the room swallow him. The applause of scholars, the pride of his achievements, the comfort of reason, all dissolved into silence. He realized, in the hollow of that awakening, that the journey he had begun in the restless hours of the night would lead him further into darkness than he had ever imagined. And yet, in that darkness, a spark flickered. The faintest hint that perhaps the fall of certainty was not the end, but the threshold of a deeper understanding yet to come. 4. The deserted scholar. The city woke to the bustle of morning, merchants shouting their wares, horses' hooves clattering on cobblestones, and the distant call to prayer threading through the air like a fragile melody. But Al-Ghazali's chamber, once his sanctuary of study and debate, was now suffused with a different rhythm, the rhythm of departure. He moved quietly, gathering only the barest necessities, a worn cloak, a few scrolls that could not be left behind, and a small satchel filled with bread and water. His hands trembled, not with hesitation, but with the weight of the decision he had made to abandon his post, his family, his students, his wealth. This was no act of rebellion against the world. It was survival. The applause of kings and scholars, once intoxicating, now felt hollow, as if the world's admiration had been a distant echo, never touching the core of his unrest. He paused in the doorway, looking back at the carved shelves lined with manuscripts, at the brass lamps that had flickered through countless nights of thought, and at the empty chairs of students who had revered him. A pang of longing passed through him. An echo of attachment he could no longer afford. The air was thick with the scent of ink, dust, and candle smoke. Each inhalation, a reminder that his life here belonged to the past. Stepping into the streets, he felt the city shift beneath him. The familiar alleys, the fountains, the clamor of merchants, all seemed unreal, like a dream he was abandoning halfway through. People passed without recognition, faces blurred like watercolors in motion. And in that indistinct crowd, Al-Ghazali felt an eerie liberation. He was free from expectation, free from authority, free from the invisible weight of applause. But he was also free into uncertainty, walking a path no one else had chosen. The scholars who would speak his name with reverence in lectures would never know the depths of his despair. The world would call him mad, even as he sought the clarity that reason could no longer provide. Each step away from home, from comfort, from certainty, was a step deeper into the unknown, a desert of both solitude and possibility. And yet, even as fear coiled in the pit of his stomach, he felt the first stirring of purpose. This abandonment was not the end of his journey. It was the threshold. By leaving everything familiar behind, he could confront the doubts that had haunted him through sleepless nights. The doubts that would shape the man he was yet to become. In the quiet hush of the morning streets, Al-Ghazali disappeared into the shadows of the city, a scholar no longer defined by his fame, only by the questions that consumed him. The applause of the world had faded. Only the call of uncertainty remained, beckoning him forward. 5. The wanderer's road. The roads stretched before him like ribbons of uncertainty, twisting through towns and deserts that blurred together under the relentless sun. Al-Ghazali, cloaked and indistinguishable among common travelers, carried nothing but a small satchel, the weight of his doubts, and a heart both heavy and unmoored. Each step on the dusty path echoed like a heartbeat of its own, a steady reminder that the world he once commanded was now slipping from his grasp. He moved through bustling bazaars where merchants hawked spices, silk, and trinkets that gleamed in the bright light. Yet the colors seemed dim, as if the sun itself had lost its authority, and the laughter of children and chatter of townsfolk drifted into his mind like the half-remembered notes of a distant dream. Faces appeared, studied him briefly, and vanished. Strangers, who might have been ghosts or illusions. In their passing, he saw reflections of his own uncertainty, fleeting, transient, ungraspable. Nights found him under the open sky, the stars trembling like distant lanterns suspended over a world that felt simultaneously vast and suffocating. The wind whispered against his cloak, carrying the scent of unfamiliar lands and the faint aroma of distant fires. Each breath reminded him that he was alive yet untethered, that he had left the world of certainty behind and entered a realm defined only by doubt. Along the winding roads, he encountered travelers who spoke of faith and reason, of the proper path and the dangers of straying. Yet their words, no matter how eloquent, seemed hollow. Al-Ghazali knew that no external counsel could reach the depth of the questions gnawing at his heart. Each conversation, each gesture of welcome or warning became a reflection of his inner tumult, a mirror of the chaos he could not yet resolve. And as he walked further, the familiar rhythms of home, the applause, the lectures, the comfort of admiration, faded entirely, replaced by a quiet that was at once terrifying and sacred. The road stretched endlessly, a silent companion to his wandering thoughts. In this solitude, he felt the first subtle stirrings of clarity, that the journey itself, the constant movement through unknown streets and sleeping towns, might hold the answers that reason and study had failed to provide. The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in molten gold and deep violet. Al-Ghazali paused, lifting his gaze to the shifting sky, and for a fleeting moment, he allowed himself to feel the paradoxical peace of being utterly lost. On this wandering road, doubt was not a curse, but a companion, guiding him forward through shadows, past illusions, and toward a truth that could not yet be named. 6. The silence of Damascus. Damascus unfolded before him like a city caught between waking and dreaming. Its winding streets, lined with honey-colored stone, seemed familiar and alien at once, as if memory and imagination had woven them into a single, fragile tapestry. Al-Ghazali moved quietly through the narrow alleys, each step muffled against the worn cobblestones, carrying the weight of a mind that had begun to see the world differently. Each sound, each shadow, each whisper of wind, now charged with meaning and uncertainty. He found refuge in the Umayyad Mosque, a sanctuary that hummed with history and reverence. The marble floors, cool beneath his feet, echoed with the faintest sounds of distant prayers, their resonance mingling with the beating of his own heart. For months, he remained here, in a deliberate silence that both shielded and isolated him. The world outside whispered of fame and fortune, of admiration and envy. Yet he no longer belonged to it. The echoes of applause and scholarly praise were nothing but distant ghosts, unable to touch the quiet urgency of his inner search. Days and nights merged into one continuous flow, marked only by the flickering of candlelight and the soft rustle of manuscripts he allowed himself to examine. Words, once his instruments, now felt alive, shifting subtly as he read them, teasing him with half-truths and hidden contradictions. Even the familiar voices of worshippers outside became strange melodies, notes that bent and stretched as though reality itself were breathing around him, teaching him patience, humility, and the language of the unseen. The crowd outside began to murmur of his absence, calling him mad, whispering that the great scholar had been consumed by folly. Yet in the depths of his solitude, Al-Ghazali discovered a paradoxical clarity. It was in silence, in the deliberate stillness, that he could hear the faint echoes of the divine, the whispers of God, subtle yet unwavering, threading through the spaces between words, between breaths, between thoughts. Time seemed to lose its measure. The sun rose and fell, and the stars rotated silently overhead, as though the city itself had paused to witness his transformation. And in this profound quiet, Al-Ghazali felt a fragile flicker of hope, that perhaps the darkness he had wandered through, the doubts that had consumed him, were not barriers, but torches illuminating a path toward a truth that reason alone could never reveal. In the hush of Damascus, surrounded by marble, shadow, and prayer, the scholar realized that silence was no longer empty. It was alive, patient, and instructive. A companion that would guide him further along the winding corridors of doubt and illumination. 7. The torch of doubt darkness seemed to follow him like a living shadow, pressing against the walls of his chamber in Damascus, seeping into the corners of his mind. For months, Al-Ghazali had wandered through the labyrinth of his own thoughts, a restless pilgrim in the desert of uncertainty. And now, at the lowest point of his inner journey, doubt no longer whispered. It roared, a relentless tide, threatening to sweep away all that he had once held certain. He walked among the flickering candlelight, shadows dancing like phantoms across the marble floors. Each manuscript he opened seemed to challenge him, questioning every conclusion he had drawn, every argument he had championed. Logic, reason, and scholarly pride, the companions he had trusted, were no longer allies. They were illusions, brittle as glass, capable of shattering at the slightest touch. Yet in the heart of that darkness, a subtle, almost imperceptible light began to flicker, a spark within the depths of despair. For the first time, Al-Ghazali understood that doubt itself was not merely a torment, but a guide. The questions that had haunted him, the sleepless nights, and the trembling uncertainty, were torches illuminating the path ahead. To flee from doubt would have been to flee from truth itself. To confront it, to walk willingly into the shadows, was to carry the flame of understanding. He stepped into the quiet courtyard of the mosque, the cool night air brushing against his face, carrying the scent of jasmine and the distant murmur of the city. The stars overhead shone with a clarity that seemed almost unnatural, as though the heavens themselves were reminding him that even in darkness, light persists. Doubt, he realized, was not an enemy. It was the torch by which one navigates the unseen, the subtle guide that reveals the hidden contours of reality. For the first time, fear and hope intertwined within him. Fear for the vast unknown still stretching before him. Hope for the revelation that the very darkness that had threatened to consume him could also illuminate the deepest truths. In this delicate balance, Al-Ghazali found a new rhythm, a pulse of understanding. The journey through doubt was itself a sacred path, a necessary passage toward clarity, insight, and the divine. As night deepened and the city lay hushed beneath a veil of stars, he embraced the paradox that uncertainty could be a teacher, that shadows could be luminous, and that the torches of doubt, though flickering and unstable, were the only light capable of guiding him through the labyrinth of the mind and the soul. 8. The betrayal of the philosophers. The scholar's pen hovered over parchment, trembling with a weight that no ink could contain. The philosophers he had once revered, those titans of reason and logic, whose brilliance had dazzled the courts and classrooms, now seemed like architects of a subtle deceit. Their elegant arguments, once admired as the pinnacle of human intellect, had become a labyrinth of shadows, leading seekers not toward truth, but toward the mirage of understanding. Al-Ghazali's hand moved slowly, scratching words that felt both necessary and sacrilegious. Each phrase was a delicate weapon, meant to challenge, to expose, to unravel the illusions he had once idolized. Yet with every stroke, a pang of longing pierced him. He still admired the brilliance, the subtlety, the beauty of their reasoning. Part of him yearned to join their ranks once more, to find refuge in certainty. But the deeper part, the part that had walked through sleepless nights, through wandering streets and silent courtyards, knew that reason, without guidance, could betray even the most faithful seeker. The manuscripts around him seemed alive, quivering as if aware of his inner conflict. He imagined the faces of those philosophers, frozen in time, unaware that their legacy might mislead the very minds they had inspired. The quiet of his chamber thickened, filled with the weight of invisible voices, the echoes of arguments past, the applause of students who had once marveled at their logic, the whispers of his own doubts now sharpened into clarity. Night deepened, and Al-Ghazali stepped onto the balcony, the city's distant lights flickering like scattered stars. The wind carried the scent of jasmine and ink, of dust and far-off fires, mingling with the taste of resolve on his tongue. He understood now that writing against the philosophers was not mere rebellion. It was an act of necessity, a guiding lantern for those who would come after, for seekers lost in the maze of reason. Yet even as he condemned their errors, he did not despise them. His admiration remained, tinged with sorrow. The betrayal was not theirs alone. It was the subtle betrayal of the human mind, of intellect unanchored by heart and spirit. And in that realization, he felt both grief and liberation. Grief for the illusions he had cherished, liberation for the path forward, where doubt and insight could dance together, without the tyranny of false certainty. As the night wrapped Damascus in its silent embrace, Al-Ghazali returned to his desk, pen poised once more. The philosopher's brilliance had been both a gift and a snare. But now, armed with doubt and the torch of his own insight, he would write a new path, one illuminated not merely by reason, but by the light of discernment, heart, and divine guidance. 9. The vision of the heart. Al-Ghazali sat in the quiet of his chamber, the candlelight flickering across the walls like restless spirits. The city outside hummed with distant life, yet within, a profound stillness had settled, a stillness that pressed him inward, toward the core of his being. Months of wandering, of doubt, of sleepless reflection had stripped away the comforts of reason and the applause of men. Now, something subtle and luminous stirred within him, a revelation not born of study, nor of logic, but of the heart. He closed his eyes, listening to the rhythm of his own breath, and for the first time, he sensed a light that no scholar's mind could calculate, no philosopher's argument could contain. It was a quiet illumination, born not from intellect, but from surrender, a warmth that seeped through the shadows of uncertainty and fear. Knowledge, he realized, did not reside solely in the senses, nor in the patterns of thought. It lived in the heart, purified, attuned to the subtle whispers of the divine. The realization hit him with the gentle force of a wave. His chest rose and fell, and each heartbeat seemed to echo a truth previously unnoticed. That reason alone, unaided by the guidance of the heart, could lead to brilliance or to blindness, clarity or delusion. He saw now that the mind must serve the heart, not the other way around, and that the pursuit of truth was inseparable from the cultivation of inner vision. He opened his eyes to the room, seeing the worn manuscripts, the scattered pens, the familiar yet transformed space. Everything seemed suffused with a subtle glow, as if the very air vibrated with insight. The stars beyond his window, once distant and indifferent, now appeared like points of divine conversation, silent yet eloquent, and in that glow, he glimpsed a harmony that reason alone had never revealed, a clarity that flowed not from argument, but from presence, attention, and trust in the heart's subtle guidance. Al-Ghazali felt a tremor of both awe and humility. The revelation was simple, yet profound. The ultimate knowledge was not measured by debates won, nor by applause gathered, but by the light that awakened within the soul. Doubt, reason, and experience had all been steps leading to this vision, and now, for the first time, he felt the tender certainty of understanding glowing quietly in the center of his being. As the night deepened and the city slept, Al-Ghazali remained seated, the candle flame dancing across his face. In the silence, he understood that this vision, the illumination of the heart, was the key to navigating all uncertainty, a compass that no external power could shake. Here, at last, he glimpsed the path that would guide him through the labyrinth of doubt, toward the enduring light of insight. 10. The return of the proof. Al-Ghazali returned to the world he had once abandoned, though it now appeared strange and distant, like a city glimpsed through a misted glass. The applause, the titles, the admiration of kings and scholars, all greeted him once more, yet their weight no longer held sway over his spirit. He walked through halls lined with eager students, each step resonating with the echo of his own journey. The months spent wandering, doubting, and listening to the silent voice of the heart. He was called Hujjat al-Islam, the proof of Islam, a beacon whose words commanded respect and reverence. In lectures and debates, he spoke with authority, his arguments precise and compelling. Kings bowed, scholars debated with care, and the students hung upon each syllable. Yet beneath the veneer of certainty, a quiet echo of doubt lingered, a subtle reminder that wisdom is not the absence of questions, but the mastery of understanding them. His writings poured forth like rivers in full spate, each treatise weaving reason with insight, intellect with the light of the heart. Manuscripts that once might have been dry and rigid now breathed with a rhythm born of experience, doubt, and illumination. He questioned, he challenged, he guided. And yet, in the quiet moments, he wondered whether those who read would grasp the essence, or whether his words would be venerated as idols, rather than explored as living insight. Even in the embrace of recognition, Al-Ghazali felt a subtle estrangement. The applause of students and the deference of scholars were distant notes, melodies that did not fully reach him. He moved through the corridors of influence with the calm of one who had seen the fragility beneath all outward forms. The crown of fame rested lightly upon him, for he had learned that authority is transient and the heart's illumination eternal. In the hushed moments of study, alone with the flickering candle and the scent of parchment, he reflected on the paradox. The man once undone by doubt had become a pillar of faith and intellect. Yet the whispers of uncertainty persisted, reminding him that the journey was ongoing, that knowledge was both a gift and a responsibility. The proof he now embodied was not a fortress of certainty. It was a torch, held steady amid shadows, lighting the way for others who would seek truth with both heart and mind. And as night fell once more over the city, Al-Ghazali sat quietly among his scrolls, aware that the light of reason, tempered by the vision of the heart, was the inheritance he could offer the world. A living testament that doubt, far from being a curse, was the beginning of enlightenment. 11. The ocean of words. Al-Ghazali's chamber overflowed with manuscripts, each scroll and book a ripple in the vast ocean of his thought. The candlelight danced across the walls, illuminating lines of ink that seemed to move like living currents, carrying centuries of reflection, doubt, and revelation. Words poured from him as effortlessly as breath, yet each one was carefully chosen, a vessel for both reason and the light of the heart. He sat at his desk, quill in hand, the scent of parchment and ink mingling with the quiet hush of night. Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the torrent of ideas unfolding in one quiet room. In that solitude, he felt the magnitude of what he was creating. Not just arguments or lectures, but a living dialogue between mind and soul, between doubt and certainty, reason and faith. The ocean of words was both a gift and a burden. He knew that those who read might misunderstand, elevating the text into rigid authority rather than engaging with it as a living current of insight. Yet he continued, compelled by the vision that had guided him through wandering roads and silent mosques, to illuminate the path for seekers, to offer the torch of understanding to those navigating the turbulent waters of the mind and spirit. Each sentence, each paragraph, seemed to ripple outward, touching unseen readers across time. He imagined students centuries hence, sitting alone with candlelight and ink, discovering the quiet illumination of the heart within his writings. And a subtle thrill ran through him, a recognition that while words are finite, their echo can stretch endlessly shaping minds and souls in ways even the author cannot foresee. In this ocean, Al-Ghazali found both humility and joy. Humility, for he knew that insight is never owned, only shared. Joy, for he sensed that even amidst doubt, the currents of thought and heart could converge into something enduring, luminous, and alive. And as night deepened, he leaned back, eyes closing briefly, listening to the gentle rhythm of his own breath, and felt the quiet truth settle. The ocean of words, like doubt itself, is a bridge, a way to carry seekers from darkness into the subtle, enduring light of understanding. 12. The stranger in his own house. Even in the midst of acclaim and recognition, Al-Ghazali felt an unfamiliar distance, as though he had returned to a house that was no longer entirely his. The walls, lined with familiar manuscripts and the echoes of past lectures, seemed to breathe quietly around him, carrying whispers of a life that felt both lived and dreamt. Each familiar object, the carved desk, the brass ink pots, the worn cushions, appeared subtly altered, tinged with the quiet strangeness of one who has wandered far from certainty. Students and scholars sought his counsel, eager to drink from the well of his knowledge. Their voices, eager and reverent, flowed over him like gentle waves, and yet Al-Ghazali could not fully receive them. The words, though clear, felt distant, like music heard from another room, beautiful but unreachable. He had returned, yes, but the home he had known was no longer his sanctuary. It had become a stage upon which the familiar and the foreign intertwined. Even his own reflection, glimpsed in a polished brass tray, seemed to question him. Was this the man who had wandered through cities, who had confronted doubt in the quiet of Damascus, who had learned to carry uncertainty as a torch? Or was this a new self, forged from shadows, doubt, and illumination, now walking among the echoes of a past life? The applause and admiration of others could not answer these questions. Only the silence of his own heart could guide him. Al-Ghazali moved through his chambers at twilight, candlelight flickering against the walls, casting long, wavering shadows that mirrored the subtle unease within him. He touched the spines of his manuscripts, traced the smooth surface of his desk, and felt the faint tremor of a life lived between certainty and doubt. And in that quiet, he understood, even in the embrace of success and recognition, the journey was not complete. One could return to the world, but the inner landscape, the terrain of the heart and mind, remained endlessly vast, mysterious, and uncharted. And so he walked through his own house as both guest and master, a stranger in familiar rooms, listening to the quiet hum of existence and the subtle pulse of insight that no accolade could ever capture. Here, amidst comfort and reverence, Al-Ghazali realized that the truest understanding comes not from the world outside, but from the depth of presence within, where the echoes of doubt and illumination continue to converse in hushed and sacred tones. 13. The sleep of the seeker night had draped the city in a quiet cloak, soft and dense, as if the world itself had exhaled. Al-Ghazali lay upon a simple mat, far from the grandeur of lecture halls and the applause of kings. The candles were extinguished, leaving only the faint glow of moonlight spilling across the floorboards. In this silence, his mind, so long restless, began to surrender to a rhythm deeper than thought. the rhythm of sleep, of dreams, of subtle communion with the unseen. He drifted, not into oblivion, but into a space where consciousness and intuition intertwined. In these hours, he no longer addressed scholars or kings. He spoke quietly, almost imperceptibly, to those who would come after him. Future seekers lying awake, listening in darkness, hearts yearning for understanding more than knowledge. His words, carried on the currents of sleep, became a lullaby of reflection, a gentle illumination for minds unsteady in the night. In this half-world between waking and dreaming, Al-Ghazali felt the familiar tension of doubt relax. Questions, once pressing like storm clouds, now floated like soft clouds across the expanse of his inner sky. He realized that sleep, too, could teach, that dreams were not merely distractions, but mirrors of the soul, echoing the truths the heart had glimpsed in waking hours. The seeker, he understood, must learn to listen both in wakefulness and in rest, allowing the quiet currents of insight to seep gently into understanding. And as his breathing deepened, slow and steady, the subtle glow of moonlight seemed to illuminate the very contours of his mind. Doubt, reason, and illumination intertwined like threads in a tapestry, each supporting the other in delicate balance. Al-Ghazali understood that philosophy itself, his lifelong pursuit, could serve as a lullaby, a gentle guide through the darkness, soothing the restless mind, while awakening the subtle light of the heart. In the hush of that night, the scholar became both teacher and dreamer, guiding not through words alone, but through presence, through the quiet rhythm of being, through the tender interplay of doubt, insight, and surrender. And as sleep fully claimed him, he felt a serene certainty. The seeker's journey is never complete, yet in the quiet embrace of night, every question carries the seed of illumination. "14. The Mirror of Dreams." Al-Ghazali's eyes fluttered beneath closed lids, the borders of sleep and wakefulness dissolving like mist at dawn. In this liminal space, the familiar city, the distant deserts, even the quiet chambers of Damascus seemed to shimmer and overlap, as though reality itself were a reflection in a water-stilled mirror. He began to sense a profound truth, that wakefulness and dreaming were not opposites, but intertwined realms, each reflecting the other with subtle, almost imperceptible shifts. In his dream, streets he had wandered by day merged with the silent corridors of his own heart. Faces of strangers, students, and philosophers swam together, some welcoming, some questioning, all holding fragments of insight he had sought so fervently. Every sound, a whisper, a step, a breath, seemed amplified, resonating with meaning beyond reason, as if the very air carried messages meant only for those attuned to the delicate currents of the soul. He saw the fleeting nature of certainty mirrored in the dreamscape. Buildings rose and fell like thoughts. Marketplaces thrummed with life, and then vanished into stillness. And in this shifting panorama, he realized that life itself might be a mirror, a dream whose contours are illuminated only when viewed with the clarity of the heart. Reality, he understood, was not merely what the senses report, but what the awakened soul perceives through the quiet reflection of doubt, insight, and surrender. A subtle light shimmered at the edge of perception, neither star nor candle, yet illuminating the dream with gentle authority. Al-Ghazali reached for it, understanding that this illumination was not external. It arose from the mirror of his own consciousness. To see truly, he must embrace the fluidity of experience, the echo of dreams, and the reflections cast by both certainty and uncertainty. As the night deepened and the dreamscape unfolded with endless variations, he felt a serene clarity that the boundaries between sleeping and waking, between illusion and truth, were permeable. The seeker's journey was not a linear path, but a dance between realms, each mirroring the other, each offering the quiet light of understanding to those patient enough to perceive it. And in this luminous reflection, Al-Ghazali glimpsed the profound continuity of all inquiry, all doubt, and all illumination, a mirror held not outside, but within. 15. The final question night deepened around Al-Ghazali, and the quiet of his chamber seemed to stretch into eternity. Candlelight flickered softly, casting long shadows that mingled with the memory of his wandering, his doubts, and the revelations he had gathered along the way. The journey of a lifetime, the restless heart, the wandering roads, the silence, the doubts, the illumination of the heart, culminated now in a question that lingered, subtle yet profound, in the very fabric of existence. He reflected on all he had seen, the fragile certainty of reason, the treacherous brilliance of philosophers, the living light within the heart, the ocean of words he had poured forth, and the mirror of dreams that showed the soul's hidden truths. And slowly, he understood that this question was not his alone. It was woven into the experience of every seeker, every sleeper, every mind daring to look beyond appearances. What if the waking world is the illusion, and dreams are the true light? The words settled gently into the quiet night, like stars sinking into the horizon. In the stillness, he sensed that the question itself was a gift, a threshold rather than a conclusion. It invited not a final answer, but ongoing reflection, a dance of consciousness that stretched across time, space, and the contours of the human soul. Each mind that encountered it would meet its own shadow, its own illumination, and in doing so, participate in the endless unfolding of understanding. Al-Ghazali closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of breath, heartbeat, and the silence carry him toward rest. The journey had been both arduous and luminous, yet he realized that the pursuit of truth is not measured by conclusions, but by the willingness to embrace uncertainty, to walk with doubt as a guide, and to let the heart illuminate what the mind alone cannot discern. And as sleep gently claimed him, he became both teacher and fellow seeker, leaving the final question to linger in the quiet minds of those who would listen, drift into dreams, and awaken to the subtle light of understanding. The question was theirs now, softly echoing beyond his chamber, beyond time, beyond certainty, the eternal invitation to explore, to wonder, and to awaken within the mirrored realms of both waking and dreaming.